birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. So based on 20, whereas it says, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood, so that even his eternal power and Godhead are clearly seen, so that the things that are made, namely us, are without excuse. So having seen the evidence of God, you're without excuse except for you to deny Him, in which that's on your own head. So, to begin with, that brings up to the topic of something called irreducibly complex, meaning that you have a system, and when you look at that system as a whole, it's relatively complex. So what we do is we break it down into its building blocks. That sounds like a good place to start. So take the building itself. If we were to examine it piece by piece, say by the cinder blocks, we would begin to see that, it's just made of these tiny bits. That makes sense. Well, when we take things such as anything in nature, essentially, and commonly we're going to discuss DNA, which is the building block of humans, animals, anything living. When you take a piece of that and you zoom in on it, seeing like what it's made out of, you notice that it's made out of smaller proteins. So we have to zoom in again, and those are made out of amino acids. So we got to zoom in again, those are made out of molecules. You gotta look again, they're made out of atoms. If you zoom that in, they're made out of electrons, protons, neutrons. If you zoom in on that, they're made out of quarks. And infinitely, so it becomes irreducibly complex. You can't reduce the complexity of that system. So no matter how many times you zoom in and try and break it up into smaller, an actual one solid building block, it becomes more evident that the smaller you go, the more complex it becomes. So that's an issue to try and determine, and that brings up the patterns of fractals. And this entire explanation is going to be rather difficult, because explaining something that's irreducibly complex is really hard. So I'm going to try and keep it basic, but essentially what fractals can tell us, fractals being you take a whole piece, such as a tree, so if you can picture a tree with all its branches coming out, and we were to cut one branch off and take that and examine it, that branch is a pattern that is statistically, all the pieces are the exact same as the tree entirety. And if we were to take a branch off the branch we cut, it would be the same again. So the irreduced complexity is proven mathematically through fractals. So I have a slideshow of some common fractals, and what we've used them for now is to essentially describe the chaos of how clouds form, how trees grow, and how mountains and rivers, when you look at it, it looks like a random mess of just things smashed together, and that's how it ended up being. But if you take it bit by bit and use a system of fractals, you can take a triangle and you can piece it together in a certain pattern, and take that pattern and then piece it together, and continue doing so and overlapping. With a computer, you can create a mountain range, and it looks very similar in every likeness to a true mountain range. So it's just one way of describing how everything is horribly chaotic, yet there's a mathematic design behind it. There's an actual purpose. So here are just some fractals in everyday life. This is just the opening of a river against the sea. It's going to go really fast. Wow. Probably go through this like 3 or 4 times then. So I can describe each of these. Lightning bolts, fractal out. Ferns, fractal, broccoli. Peacocks, clouds, crystals, mountain ranges, leaves, your veins, and there's one there. You can sort of make sense of that really quick before it disappears. These are computer generated fractals. One of the most common uses for a fractal nowadays is antennas. You know how I used to have that horribly long antenna coming out of your cell phone? There's a box fractal, and they meshed it up and squished it in to itself, and that works exceedingly well so that we don't have to have a huge wire running around. I wish I could pause it on all of these to describe them, but it won't let me and show it at the same time. I don't have any of that on this, which is kind of annoying. But we'll just, yeah. But if you can see with each one of these how you've got the whole and then it separates into smaller bits that are exactly a fraction of the whole, that's the whole point. And this, along with the golden ratio, which is how they are correlated to one another, has been dubbed as God's blueprint. His design blueprints of how he created everything. And you can essentially apply this to everything. A fractal, any random ambiguous shape can be formed with the right fractal pattern. Now, getting that actual pattern is beyond me, but from what we've learned, it works very well. So that's just one mathematical way. And then one of the other things, which is DNA, which is irreducibly complex, I found a quick 10-minute video, and the visual of it isn't as important as the audio of these people. And what's so amazing about this is that all of these chemical evolutionists, microbiologists, doctorate, brilliant minds of the world in all of their fields got together for a meeting, and they all tried to figure out, how can we make this evolution thing work? And the more they looked at it, they started to figure out it doesn't fit. And they eventually, several of them, if not all, ended up retracting all of their previous notions and theories, and were like, the only thing we can really come to conclusion is this was intelligently designed.
Didn't some of them become Christians?
Yes, several have. And so we're going to look at DNA, and then I also have a brief description of the eye, the flagellum of a bacterium, which is the little tail, and it spins and it makes them move, and then blood clotting, things which are irreducibly complex and cannot be proved or evolved in any such scientific way. Only hope it loads.
It is called DNA.
Can you
Initially, Kenyon believed that proteins could have formed directly from amino acids without any DNA assembly instructions. And that's why so many scientists were excited about his theory. But the more he and others learned about the properties of amino acids and proteins, the more he began to doubt that proteins could self-assemble without DNA.
Not online.
In DNA, Kenyon encountered a molecule with a property he could not explain through natural processes. For locked securely within its double helix structure is a wealth of information in the form of precisely sequenced chemicals that scientists represent with the letters A, C, T, and G. In a written language, information is communicated by a precise arrangement of letters. In the same way, the instructions necessary to assemble amino acids into proteins are conveyed by the sequences of chemicals arranged along the spine of the DNA. This chemical code has been called of life, and it is the most densely packed and elaborately detailed assembly of information in the known universe.
Like other scientists working on the origin of life, Kenyon realized he had two choices. Either he had to explain where these genetic assembly instructions came from, or he had to explain how proteins could have arisen directly from amino acids without DNA in the primordial oceans. And in the end, he realized he could do neither.
It's an enormous problem how you could get together in one tiny submicroscopic volume of the primitive ocean all of the hundreds of different molecular components you would need in order for a self-replicating cycle to be established. And so my doubts about whether amino acids could order themselves into meaningful biological sequences on their own without pre-existing genetic material being present just reached, I guess for me, the intellectual breaking point sometime near the end of the decade of the 70s.
As Kenyon reevaluated his theory, new biochemical discoveries further weakened his conviction that amino acids could have organized themselves into proteins.
The more I conducted my own studies, including a period of time at NASA Ames Research Center, the more it became apparent that there were multiple difficulties with the chemical evolution account. And further experimental work showed that amino acids do not have the ability to order themselves into any biologically meaningful sequences.
Faced with mounting difficulties in his own theory and a growing body of scientific data about the importance of DNA, Kenyon was forced to confront the absolute necessity of genetic information.
The more I thought about the alternative that was being presented in the criticism and the enormous problem that all of us who worked on this field had neglected to address, the problem of the origin of genetic information itself, then I really had to reassess my whole position regarding origins.
For Dean Kenyon, a new question became the focus of his search for life's origin. What was the source of the biological information in DNA?
If one could get at the origin of the messages, the encoded messages within the living machinery, then you would really be on to something far more intellectually satisfying than this chemical evolution theory.
Yet Kenyon realized that he faced a narrowing set of options. By the 1970s, most researchers had rejected the idea that the information necessary to build the first cell originated by chance alone. To understand why, consider the difficulty of generating just 2 lines of Shakespeare's play Hamlet by dropping Scrabble letters onto a tabletop. Then consider that the specific genetic instructions required to build the proteins in even the simplest one-celled organism would fill hundreds of pages of printed text.
Of course, the serious origin of life biologists did not believe that life had arisen by chance alone. Instead, they envisioned natural selection acting on random variations among chemicals to produce the first life. But there was a problem with this proposal.
By definition, natural selection could not have functioned before the existence of the first living cell, for it can only act upon organisms capable of replicating themselves, cells equipped with DNA that pass on their genetic changes to future generations.
Without DNA, there is no self-replication. But without self-replication, there is no natural selection. So you can't use natural selection to explain the origin of DNA without assuming the existence of the very thing you're trying to explain.
Chance, natural selection, and his own theory of self-organization had all failed to explain the origin of genetic information. Now Kenyon saw only one alternative.
We have not the slightest chance of a chemical evolutionary origin for even the simplest of cells. So the concept of the intelligent design of life was immensely attractive to me and made a great deal of sense, as it very closely matched the multiple discoveries in molecular biology.
In the years since Kenyon's rejection of chemical evolution, science has revealed the details of an entire system of information processing that bears the hallmarks of intelligent design. With computer animation, we can enter the cell to view this remarkable system at work. After entering the heart of the cell, we see the tightly wound strands of DNA, storehouses for the instructions necessary to build every protein in an organism. In a process known as transcription, a molecular machine first unwinds a section of the DNA helix to expose the genetic instructions needed to assemble a specific protein molecule. Another machine then copies these instructions to form a molecule known as messenger RNA. When transcription is complete, the slender RNA strand carries the genetic information to the nucleopore complex, the gatekeeper for traffic in and out of the cell nucleus. The messenger RNA strand is directed to a two-part molecular factory called a ribosome. After attaching itself securely, the process of translation begins. Inside the ribosome, a molecular assembly line builds a specifically sequenced chain of amino acids. These amino acids are transported from other parts of the cell and then linked into chains often hundreds of units long. Their sequential arrangement determines the type of protein manufactured. When the chain is finished, it is moved from the ribosome to a barrel-shaped machine that helps fold it into the precise shape critical to its function. After the chain is folded into a protein, it is then released and shepherded by another molecular machine to the exact location where it is needed.
This is absolutely mind-boggling to perceive at this scale of size such a finely tuned apparatus, a device that bears the marks of intelligent design and manufacture. And we have the details of an immensely complex molecular realm of genetic information processing.
It cuts off kind of. That's just like a 10-minute excerpt from an entire video. But that was a single, simple cell of life. Just your absolute basic form of life. All of that goes in thousands of times during the day just so that cell can have energy and function and know what to do. So I'm not even sure how to explain all of it. I think they did a pretty good job. But you start with inside the nucleus, the nucleolus of the cell, which is the brain. You've got the DNA. And there's a little machine that comes up and unzips it. And you've got another one that comes on and it matches up of what this strand, this half of it, it copies all of it, and then that's taken off, sent out, taken into a ribosome, which copies it into the actual protein it needs to be, just the chain, and then it ships into another device which folds it up, and the order it's folded and the way it's folded all changes what it actually does. So if it's folded just to the left when it should have gone right, it'll do something completely different. And so you fold that up, and then it takes it out, and then it ships it off, and there's another horribly long process for what it actually does. So there's several of these different mechanisms that show how horribly complex everything is. And that's just the proteins. That doesn't even go into the actual atoms and the way the electrons bounce around with each other. And it just gets even worse and worse trying to fathom and explain how it works.
More beautiful, more beautiful.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you look at it from the aspect of this is how God designed it. It's awful when you try and look at it like we're going to figure out how this works. It's a nightmare. So,
You hear that joke about the scientists that decided to have this conference and tell God that we don't need him anymore because we can do everything he does. Oh, you can even make a man? Oh yes, we can make a man. Well, show me. And so they started getting the clay and the dirt and said, oh, come on guys, you have to use your own dirt.
This is pretty good. So, to couple along with that, we've also got the eye, the flagellum, and blood clotting as just some other examples of how complex the things you might take for granted are, like your eye, and you just, like, you understand that light goes in, I see things, and then I can react accordingly. But to look at how it was designed and how all of the light works inside it's epic, to say the least. So, I'll just read a couple paragraphs. Some of these talk about chemicals that I can't pronounce, so just bear with me. We'll see if we can try and understand this together. It is interesting to note that the eye, which evolutionists claim is an example of bad design left over from evolution, presents their greatest challenge as an example of superb, irreducible complexity in God's creation. Scientific America says, generations of creationists have tried to counter Darwin by citing the example of the eye as a structure that could not have evolved. The eye's ability to provide vision depends on the perfect arrangement of its parts, these critics say. Natural selection could thus never favor the transitional forms needed during the eye's evolution. What good is half an eye? Anticipating this criticism, Darwin suggested that even incomplete eyes might confer benefits, such as helping creatures orient towards light, and thereby survive for further evolutionary refinement. First, this overlooks the incredible complexity of even the simplest light-sensitive spot. Second, it's fallacious to argue that 51% vision would necessarily have a strong enough selective advantage over 50% to overcome the effects of genetic drift's tendency to eliminate even beneficial mutations. Biology has vindicated Darwin. Researchers have identified primitive eyes and light-sensing organs throughout the animal kingdom and have even tracked the evolutionary history of eyes through comparative genetics. It now appears that in various families of organisms, eyes have evolved independently. That's what Scientific America says. And the rebuttal to this is Scientific America contradicts itself here. If the evolutionary history of eyes has been tracked through comparative genetics, how is it that eyes have supposedly evolved independently? Actually, evolutionists recognize that eyes must have arisen independently at least 30 times, because there's no evolutionary pattern to explain the origin of eyes from a common ancestor. What this really means is that since eyes cannot be related to common ancestors, and since they are here, the only materialistic explanations are allowed. There's proof that they evolved independently. So, what that is saying is the eye, if it did evolve independently, because there's 30 different types of eyes, but since there's no common ancestor for it, and it is here, then it couldn't have evolved. Because they would all have to have come back from one, seemingly, if you branch off from each other. So, this is the really difficult part coming up, and this explains how the eye actually works. So, I'm going to try and read this in the best layman terms possible. Here is how the simulation proceeds. Firstly, the light-sensitive layer bends gradually into a cup, so it can tell the direction of light rays. This is how they assume that the eye evolved. So what they have is, if you've got sort of this, you've just got this curved surface. On the top, you've just got a sense of nerves and cells that can sense light. And then from that, they assume that it kind of curved inward to like that, to where through the opening, this aperture, light could only come in, and therefore you could direct and sense where the light was coming from. After that, they assume that this hollow area inside the curve was filled with some gelatinous material that helped keep things out and blocking light from coming in. And then from that, they get to the actual iris and the pupil. I'm not sure how they connected those two. That just kind of formed for kicks and giggles, I guess. But that's essentially what the evolutionists believe of how the eye came about. But if you look into just the simplest light-sensitive spot, there's a horrible exponentially amount of chemicals that have to react in the certain spot at the perfect time to get one particle photon, if you will, of light to react and make everything go off and rearrange itself to where you can then sense the vision. And the part I want to read is that when light first strikes the retina, a photon interacts with a molecule called 11 cis retinal, which rearranges within picoseconds to transretinal. So a picosecond is 1 times 10 to the negative 12th, which is essentially the speed of light. So when a photon hits this molecule, it goes from like an A and a B and a B and an A, and it rearranges in a picosecond to be AABB. And that's just one molecule in the array of chemicals. And so the conclusion of that is, for all of these parts, even if you just had them all there, they would have to be arranged in the right way and react in the right sequence of events for this one photon to then confer and create an image. And also, if that were to happen, this implicates that there's a nervous system going to something that could process this information, such as a brain, that could then realize that, okay, I normally see light, and now there's a shadow, and then to think that could be a predator, and now I have to respond. So going from the photon to the molecules to the chemicals to the nerves through the brain, processing and then reacting, it all either had to be there at once or not at all.
Exactly.
Which then moves us to the bacterial flagellum. So this is like a little coiled up tail coming out of this pill-shaped bacterium, and it spins incredibly fast, and it makes the bacteria move. And so just some quick specs for this, and for those mechanically minded who know what an outboard motor looks like, that's what this is on a nanoscale. So this little tail has the following features. It has self-assembly and repair. It is water-cooled rotary engine. It is proton motive force drive system. So the protons fuel it. It has forward and reverse gears. It has operating speeds of up to 100,000 revolutions per minute. Direction reversing capability within 1/4 of a turn, and a hardwired signal transduction system with short-term memory. And what they also found out recently was some of these have a clutch. Like, no joke, it's got a clutch so it can like spin faster, slow down with gears. So this little fella can be going on with this thing spinning at 100,000 revolutions per minute, and then it can stop and go backwards, and then it can turn, and it can go every which way it needs to. And it also has the clutch, so when it needs to switch into a higher revolution, it just pops on, switches, comes on and off. And there was one guy, I saw a video, that had studied that thing, just the bacterial flagellum, for 20 years. And he was like, so basically, we have no idea how this came about. And he kind of likened it to either it was intelligently designed, because if we, assuming, we'll give the evolutionists, we'll just say, okay, assuming all this stuff came about. If I took a whole bunch of wood and bricks and concrete and rebar and shingles and wires and windows, and we threw them in a pile, I don't have a house. It's just a pile of junk, essentially. So even with all of it present, if it's not in the right area, it's not going to spin. And then going back to just the complexity of each of those parts, the flagellum, some brilliant guy came up with, alright, so this flagellum, those parts we see in this other thing. So they were like, why couldn't this other thing have just sort of kind of transformed into the tail? And they were like, alright, sounds kind of like a decent idea. So we'll look at it. And they were like, there's 40 parts to this flagellum, 40 independent pieces that fit together, 10 of which are previously found in other things. The other 30 are found nowhere else in any cell, anything. They're their own separate independent pieces. Where in the world did those come from? And they don't know. And then the last one is blood clotting. Similarly, the blood clotting system seems to involve the modification and elaboration of proteins that were originally used in digestion. So they were like, okay, blood clotting seems to have come from digestion, and so what they decided to do with this is just figure out what is the necessity of blood clotting. So this one guy was like, alright, I'm going to take 2 mice and I'm going to turn off the blood clotting gene in this one. And so he did, and he let them live for a while and just studied them. And the mice that had his genes turned off, so his blood wouldn't clot, didn't get any internal blood clots, whereas the other mouse did. And so he was like, this one's healthier without the blood clotting system. Like, that's a decent conclusion, but what you've completely neglected is that if this mouse gets a paper cut, he's going to die because his blood will clot. So, it's just an awful experiment, but it shows how hard they will try to work and isolate this one tiny instance to try and prove the entire scope of their argument. And it's just like, really? That's the best you had? It's kind of disappointing, but so I just wanted to inform you of these things because you read in the Bible all the time, like, and you can see that everything was made by God. But to just have that greater appreciation for it and understand how these things actually fit into each other is just ridiculous. So really quick, I'm going to try to explain kind of the scope of from the infinite little parts to the magnitude. And it's really hard to think of, but just so you can kind of picture, all of this happened, and then I would love for someone to tell me, yeah, evolution did that. So essentially what we have, starting from the energy of what you need for life, is you start with the sun, and it's got a whole bunch of helium and hydrogen and other stuff that are burning. And that's due to radioactive decay, which breaks those atoms into little bits, which send off photons. The photons come into Earth, and the plants have chlorophyll, which take energy and turn it into mass, essentially, equals mc squared. It's ridiculous. So they take that, and through their DNA of the horribly immense proteins and atoms, they make their own sugars, and then other things eat those plants, and we eat those, which give us energy. But it's not enough to just eat it. You have to have the things that'll process and break down the food. So we have to have our own enzymes of proteins, which are again made up of molecules, atoms, quarks. So you've got all that, but then while that's going on, you also have the complexity of the Earth spinning and the way it's going about the sun, as well as how the clouds form, how precipitation comes up and falls, as well as the way mountain ranges are formed, the way lightning comes down, the way a tree grows, the way tornadoes are produced, the balance of all the chemicals in the atmosphere, all of the water, and the way light refracts through it, and then you've got all the other planets and how we don't smash into all those, not to mention the other galaxies that are all spinning about at the same time. And that's like not even the tip of the iceberg of all the things that are going on at once in 1 picosecond. And as all of that spins about and the neurons and synapses fire off in your brain right now, while you have a fractal system of an inverted tree that takes in the oxygen and turns it into carbon dioxide and goes to the hemoglobin to provide energy for all the other cells that you've got, and the photons come in so you can see me, and then not even to mention the whole sound wave effect with the ear bone and the... got me. But as you just think about all that shenanigans and nonsense for a second, it's a eloquent, functioning, beautifully intertwined system, and for you to tell me that God isn't actively doing that right now, you're an imbecile. It's not also irreducibly complex. It's just right the regular. Just now, if you just look at the, without even zooming in, it's horribly complex. So the purpose of this was just to give you that greater appreciation for everything God does every picosecond of the day, that you don't even think about. And so, not even to mention all the things that go on inside your body, but every other molecule in the universe. He's like, so you can just like picture him sitting at a desk, like just poking everything really fast. And then on top of just holding everything together, he's still like able to like talk to people through like the burning bush, and he comes down and he gave all the commandments. So on top of holding everything together, he has like a storyline, and then he was able to send Christ down, and then the Holy Spirit, while himself is working everything. It's just so much. So, yeah, so if you just have that greater appreciation, so the whole, like, blind faith, seeing invisible things, those are all the invisible attributes, and they're clearly seen. And when people finally see them, they're without excuse. There was one scientist in particular, I'm not sure who it was, but he was all gung-ho evolution. And then he just looked at a peacock. Just a simple peacock. And he was like, there's no way. There's no way evolution could have done that. And he was converted. And he was like, God has to exist. I can't argue that. So I'll read Romans 1:20 one more time. And that will be my close. For since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. And then actually, I still have it up, there's one other verse, Psalms 139 verse 14. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. My soul knows it very well. So, it's just really fun to think. Unless you get like aneurysm or something like that.
Mind blown.
Yeah.
Like there's a book called Fearfully and Wonderfully Made.
Yeah?
Yeah, and it was a doctor who specialized in leprosy here in Louisiana.
Yeah?
And it's fascinating how the body works. And
Yeah.
also, he correlates that to how the body of Christ works together, just like the human body.
What was that video?
It was a whole series.
Is it on the web?
Yeah, it's. I'll get back to you on that because there's an actual video name. If I can just look through the comments. Yeah, and send you what it is. You can actually go get the VHS of it or the DVD. But yeah, so if you have any questions on that, but it.
Thank you.
I just like some resource information, just to
There's
learn
a-
more.
There's a series of DVDs
Yeah,
called the Truth Conference
okay.
that Charles led, and you might contact Rena. She's probably got them.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
But it's a series of DVDs that goes through the same exact thing, like complexity of the body and bumps. The whole thing is to debunk evolution. It's like,
I'm teaching them next week as well, right? Okay. Second half?
so you might
Okay.
check the Reno and she may have
Okay.
some copies of it too.
I'm not questioning evolution versus creationism at all. I am just interested in knowing more
Okay.
about the function of the cell and the DNA and the proteins.
This talks about that.
Okay, that's,
Yeah.
So,
that's what
Yeah.
that's.
I know parts of it, but I
You just Google intelligent design.
No.
We'll come up with loads of stuff. But I think next week, I'll probably be doing something out of the Bible. I think I'm gonna do what?
Tackle Revelation.
Tackle Revelation, right? Because I understand that. I feel like I could understand DNA better than I could understand Revelations.
Yeah.
That is a really rough chapter. I think I might do Philippians 1. Has anyone done that? No? Alright. And the verse would be Philippians 1:21. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. So I think I'll do that next week. That should be good.
You know, I've always never understood that use of the term fearfully made and fearfully wonderfully made. So I never put the two concepts together. But if, as he presented this morning, that you understand the complexity, you cannot deny God through creation, through this thing that you are so complex